to have you back. And if you're just joining us, well, you're watching our election studio where Nigeria decides. And the discussion today is looking at persons with disabilities, the challenges and the way forward. We earlier had some of our guests speaking with us on some of the plight that has been the bane of discussion year in, year out. And now we also have Ijeoma Ugwu, the convener of Awake Autism, with us, as well as Femi Gbadebo. Thank you very much for still staying behind.
Thank you so much.
Now, it was a new dawn when we all received the news of the disability bill receiving presidential assent over 18 years back and forth. Now, Ijeoma, I would like to have your thoughts. What emotions did this strike? Because if we are pushing for people with disabilities and breaking all of the barriers that keep on raising their ugly heads, how do you feel about this bill receiving assent?
Yeah, so many people are excited, but I don't just know why I am not. Because maybe I didn't see an encompassing bill. I read through it, through the report on the newspaper, and they were talking about people with hearing impairment and physical disabilities. And then I asked, how about the hidden disabilities? How about people with mental health challenges? How about people with neurodevelopmental delays and impairments? How about all of these people? I know it's going to be a huge thing, but I mean, someone could have at least put them into perspective.
But what other policies then would you rather say we should have? Because if this bill is not, this law is not all-encompassing, and at the end of the day, the laws that we have must always evolve, be amended, and a whole lot more. What would you push for? I
would push for, there's already an inclusion, and then I would push for even the one that's on the table. What are the plans for implementation? How do we go about ensuring that people are doing what the law says? And even when they are not doing it, how do we ensure that if I go to reports, maybe a parent whose child is not being admitted to school because he or she is impaired, even a young person who's not been employed because he or she is impaired, how do you go about addressing these things? So are there all of these things in place to follow the law, to kind of implement and address this? Okay, in the bill they talked about fines of #1 million.
Yes, and for corporate bodies, 100,000 naira for individuals, and then a term of 6 months of imprisonment for violations.
We all know it's going to be, especially for those with neurodevelopmental impairments, we all know it's going to be like the HIV era. Nobody will stand up and tell you, because you have autism, I am not going to employ you. Nobody will tell you that. They will definitely find some other reason. So these are problems on the background that even the law may not be able to solve. But these are just, they are just concerns that we have. So many people with impairments, well, maybe I'm being one-sided. I'm just thinking about neurodevelopmental impairments, mental health impairments. These people are not captured, and even with the law, I still see a lot of loopholes.
Wow, Ijeoma has touched on something that I'm sure Femi would like to jump on. Now, she's talking about deficiencies in the bill that has been passed. What's your take on that?
Well, this is a bill that emanated from 2000, like you said. 18 years ago. At that time, disability in Nigeria was more about what you could see. And that's why when you hear governments doing something about disability, they're doing wheelchairs, walking sticks, canes for the blind and braille and all that, even maybe hearing aids. But things have evolved now. And the awareness, especially from those pushing autism and so many other things, has just exploded. And so now we understand. Look at the issue of mental health. Look at, the case of depression and suicides that we had of late. So people are aware. And so we need to celebrate that now there's a law. The next thing is interpretation of the law. We must test the law. We must define what is disability in Nigeria. Okay? And as you begin to define it, it begins to capture everybody. And it is for the various stakeholders, those who are in these other groups, to take the law, tear it apart, and identify where they're left out, and begin to push for inclusion in those acts. So to me, I celebrate it. It's one big step. And the next is for us, stakeholders out there, to come together and begin to work to make these things more clearly understood by everybody.
Now, don't you think that the imposing of the fines for violation or discriminating against persons with disability is one way to ensure that, well, we correct that narrative where we always have that discrimination?
You see, you don't make a law without a penalty. So what they've done is to put a penalty, and the penalty, like you see, is on corporate bodies.
Individuals as well.
Well, on individuals, if I'm not nice to you, you probably spend more than 100,000 to take me to court to prove that I wasn't nice to you because you're disabled. But at least it is there, and somebody needs to test it, and now it can be tested. The rest of it, I would say, is you need to talk to some parents. Some of us who deal with parents and all, parents are ready. Parents have been, even on this issue of admission into schools, but then you must always look on both sides. Is the school really ready? Is the school, do they have the staff, and so on? So a lot of awareness, a lot of education has to take place. And then, of course, as we do that, loopholes are identified. And the only person that can fill these loopholes is not that woman that decided to just set up a school and now want to make an example of her for not admitting a child. It is the government that has failed to set up enough institutions for this kind of children that should now be made to come to the rescue, or at least to their assistance.
Femi, I'd like to tackle you on that, because so many people have said, well, we don't need special institutions. Instead, we need existing institutions to incorporate these individuals. Now, Ijeoma, let's talk about the incorporation of infrastructure, building structures, and a whole lot more. This law now provides a 5-year transitional period within which public building structures and all of those make all of these amendments. But are you optimistic that we'll see any change anytime soon? Even in our hospitals, we know where everybody runs to in cases of medical situation. There are still lapses here and there. So now the busing system, we should have places for persons who would have to go on a wheelchair. It means somebody who is deaf or blind might need a bell to ring and then be able to locate his or her way there and all of those. How don't you think it's a little bit too ambitious to say that we'll be able to achieve this in 5 years beyond just the talk on paper?
Yeah, it might sound ambitious, but had it been we had a history of implementation, had it been we had a history of monitoring, had it been we had a history of just putting a check, I would say it wouldn't be that difficult. But we all know the society we live in. We hardly see anybody going for check, and even when they go, we all know what happens in most cases. So people just go there, look around, get treated like princes and queens, and they walk away. They give warnings and nothing happens after all. Yeah, you got something from me. You don't have the moral right to sanction me. Yes, but the implementation, if
but
there is...
Remember during the Fashola era or regime government, there was an implementation where...
Brahms.
Yes, where you have Brahms and all other infrastructures to just put in place. But like you've rightly said, we don't see any implementation. This government of the Ambode hasn't added to that. So we keep on having these lapses year in, year out. So what should we be looking for as a people now when it comes to having infrastructures that would think of everybody?
Just like every other thing, I think we should be much more involved in this country. We are good at saying, oh, this is none of my business, let me just leave it. I would say that each one of us, anywhere we are, out there, if you're watching, if it is in your powers to do these things, don't think it's none of your business. Do it. It's for the good of every other person out there. So what I think that will be doable is that individuals on their own without having to be pushed around by the law, should take it upon themselves to include these other people. It could be even if it's none of your relatives right now, it could be one tomorrow, someday.
Okay, thank you so much, Ijeoma. We're going to focus on special needs, people with special needs. But before we go into that, you talked about implementation. But I think it starts with sensitization and efforts to change attitude.
Yes.
You both people who are working in organizations, and you're advocating for something to happen.
Yes.
You want people to accept people with disability and, of course, people with special needs. How do we begin to get our people in the mood to do the right thing in relation to people with disability?
Well, it's about attitudinal change, and it's about advocacy, raising awareness. You see, people need to understand that these things are acts of God, acts of nature, and that they are not contagious, they're not infectious, and of course they are not hereditary. And then we also need to do what we in Benola begin to put a positive face on disability. Unfortunately, most of the disabled that we see in Nigeria are the beggars at street corners, in traffic, who are living very under difficult conditions. So sometimes they're not tidy, they're not healthy, they're not whatever. But if we see that as the picture of disability, then we're missing it. Because a lot of people around us, they're wearing glasses, they're using crutches, they're using wheelchairs, they use other things. But because they're well dressed, because they speak well, we don't even see them as disabled. And then there are people who are denying the fact that they have children or siblings who have this peculiar conditions, or who have hidden disabilities like asthma, like I said, high blood pressure and all, and they keep it away from the public until something happens. That's why sometimes you see these sudden deaths.
Femi, okay. Let's look at people with special needs now, either autistic, dyslexic, or some sort of mental,
Cerebral palsy as well.
and a whole lot more. In your scorecard, you've seen the lapses within the Buhari-led government. Has that gone so well? And what would be the solution now in moving forward? Yes, we always identify the challenges, but what in 5 steps or 5 areas, where would you say we should be taking to get things right, and then the next government?
I'd say they started out by saying they were going to do something about disability, and I think in less than a year, the president had appointed a special advisor on disability. A vision-impaired professor in Abuja who has an office. They've done some work, not as much as I would have expected. You see, when you understand the power of advocacy, then you would focus on public enlightenment, because people must understand what disability really is and about that. Then you must focus on government. These changes we're talking about, whether it's access to buildings, whether it's transportation and all, it's easy to say that, you know, you're going to fine a corporate body $1 million if they don't do it. Who's going to find government? So government must set the pace by beginning to do this. And not the way it's been done in the past, where you just find people from Ministry of Work rushing to put ramps without this. You must consult the experts and let the expert tell you what's the right gradient for a ramp and things like that. Then as, you see, we've come to find that disability management is not about just putting people in a home and caring for them. All of us have something to do. Some of us can just be advocates. So what I'm saying is that you go out and you see a public building with a ramp or something, make some noise about it. Let's celebrate that organization. You see somewhere where it's not there or it's not well done, talk about it. Let's shame that organization. Some NGOs now should become, you know, should come out and police the police, so to speak, and be the ones going out to point out what has not been done. And I think with this law that's been in place, and with a concerted effort to make things begin to work, you don't talk about public transport, free public transportation or so on, without identifying who gets it and what. Because you see, a blind person needs 2 passes to go on free transport. The same thing with a woman with a child, okay? And it cannot, nobody has a permanent escort. So we must, and then the passengers in the bus are going to ask you, why is he not paying? So they must also understand. So that's where I'm talking about, that a holistic approach must be taken to get this thing done.
Now, thank you so much, Femi. Let me bring you in here, Ijeoma. because we are talking about, he talked about government setting the pace.
Yeah.
We know that the forthcoming election is going to be the first we'll be conducting after the passage of the disability bill. What should change about the conduct of the election?
What should change is
Yes.
that, excuse me, at polling stations, there should be provision for people who are visually impaired and who are also physically impaired. So there should be arrangements, but I'm beginning to feel it's a bit late.
No, INEC has
Is it?
actually said that,
No,
well,
it's
there'll
not
be
late.
guides for
Okay,
persons with
yeah, they have
disability,
made
and
the
then there's
declaration
special
that there will be
polling booths
guide.
as well.
But
Okay.
beyond the guides now, what do you expect? We also have people with special needs.
Yes.
Yeah. Is INEC well trained? Do we have, is there the chance that INEC officials are going to be trained and well trained to handle the range of people with disability that we expect to turn up for the polls?
I
That's
really
another thing.
doubt that, because even these people we are talking about were not even reflected in the bill, in the law. So there is still this gap of even the awareness. So until you know that something exists before you begin to seek a solution to it. So there was no mention of mental disability or any form of neurological impairment
Okay,
in
so
the
it
law.
might be limited
So,
to people with physical disability
yeah,
and how to...
yeah,
Okay,
personally,
Femi,
I
are you-
feel they are not
Well,
ready
you see,
for
what I would
that.
like to add to that is that most people who have learning disability, mental disability, and stuff like that can be captured in a voter's ID card. If they have not been captured now, well, it's late for this time.
Late, yeah.
But for future elections, it's about educating the people. There even the case of those who are unable to leave their homes for one reason or the other, even the old and the aged, that we must begin to recognize that they exist and have somebody vote for them by proxy and so on. So, but for now, one of the things INEC can do is to educate their staff and also educate the public, which I've had them doing on TV, to give priority to people who have disabilities. Because they will not, you wouldn't expect a line of 40 people and somebody who has whatever kind of disability to queue with you, so, or even a pregnant woman for that matter. So certain things were done in 2015. There was some voter education done, there was some effort done, and now that the INEC chairman has been talking about it and everybody's talking about it, I believe that we will see a marked
Some
improvement. It
changes.
is for the people themselves to be willing to come out and test.
Okay, now I want to take you back to something you said in the last segment. We were talking about how the educational system can assist people with special needs. What should we begin to do to ensure that teachers know just what to look out for, just in case a child is not responding normally? How do we begin to get our teachers to the point where they are able to function for every child?
Workshops. We must conduct a lot more workshops, but by experts. If you're on social media these days, you'll see all kinds of workshops going on. The problem is, are the people conducting these workshops competent enough? The idea is not to make everybody a special needs educator. The idea is to make every teacher aware of the signs and symptoms of limitations in a person, whether it's mental or otherwise. That way, they will be able to identify this child and even help parents. Because you see, the truth is that a lot of parents live in denial. A child is not speaking at 2.5, 3 years. They say it's okay, it's slow. But it's somebody else who can say, this child's not slow, or he's not making eye contact, or whatever. Okay? So you need, and if you as a friend tell some mothers, there'll be enemies immediately.
For life.
But you see, when an independent person, either a healthcare practitioner in a hospital or the teacher in the school says, Madam, I think Joe needs to see a specialist, they listen. So that's where we need to train these people so that they are the third parties who waken the parents or who are waking to the parents that something's wrong with children.
But then beyond workshops, don't you think something should happen in the curriculum for educating teachers?
Oh, yeah. We've tried to move for it. I mean, it's not just teachers, even for healthcare practitioners. Every healthcare practitioner should know the basic signs of a child that has neurodevelopmental disability because they're not hitting milestones. and you can detect it sometimes as early as a couple of weeks after birth. Okay, but if you don't teach these symptoms in teachers colleges and health the various health training institutions, then we'll be stuck with experts who continue to test, and they just send us children for one test after the other, because when the parents say the child has a problem, and so on. Because the curriculum in colleges of medicine, school of nursing, and even the teacher training college does not include anything about developmental disabilities or early intervention. And they can just be put in as electives. And that would put us in a couple of years way ahead of even some of the countries in the developed world.
Wow. Thank you so much, Femi, for that very insightful one. Ijeoma, you are the convener, Awake Autism.
Yes.
I'm curious to know why you chose to campaign for more attention in autism, for people to recognize it as something that we should be talking about. What prompted you, and how far have you gone in this?
Well, I would say I am directly affected by autism spectrum disorder. So what made me go all the way is that at certain point I realized there was a very strong discrimination. And these children, they have what we could call sixth sense. They can sense even when you don't like them. So there was a certain situation where the child was so discriminated against that even herself was feeling so uncomfortable in her own environment. So I had to convene a meeting. I spoke to everyone, starting from the smallest from the youngest to the eldest. I spoke the language they could understand. I told them what is wrong with this child is not contagious first, so don't run away from her. What she has is not like a curse. It's something even science has not identified yet. So, well, at the end of the day, we saw a huge change where there was a high level of acceptance, and the child felt it and felt so happy. So from there, I realized that the huge part of our problem is not the existence of the problem, but the ignorance around it. So I felt that by creating the awareness, the public will get to understand it better. And if a child is sitting by you in a public bus, and then he or she is drooling or doing this way, you don't just stand up and run away and start screaming, and the child feels bad. He has no control over what he or she is doing. And then some parents, if you put this child in their class, they would demand for a transfer. They would demand that their child be taken away from the class. So, but by the time the parent understands that, okay, because many people feel, okay, the child is under spiritual,
That's true.
is possessed by evil spirits. Some people will think, it's the wickedness of the father or the village people, or all those beliefs. But by the time they understand that this is just a normal anatomical anomaly, something that just happened down the line, and there will be greater level of acceptance.
And in getting things right, especially within our educational system, I believe, would you be of the thought that we now have to teach more of social skills and communication skills, especially children with these special needs? You made mention of the drooling and all of those. I know once in a while, because my mom actually works with a school that has to do with that, and then one of the pointers she keeps on hitting on is that when a child is even drooling, it's either the guide or even the child himself would. There are some promptings that once in a while he would just take it and clean his mouth and all of those. We have to also train these children to be able to cater for themselves, because people always have this mentality that they are dirty and they are all of these negative things. But it's not right. What should we be telling the children when it comes to basic etiquettes and social communication skills?
Yes, I call it our community of people living with these disabilities. We have people we call occupational therapists. So they teach the child even how to use the loo, how to clean up, there's usually an occupational therapist and a speech therapist. There's a speech therapist that teaches the child how to talk, massages the muscles. Then the occupational therapist teaches the child even how to hold spoon, because so many of them have a mitochondrial dysfunction, or just some of these issues that do not enable them to use their muscles properly. So the occupational therapist tries to help the child to learn how to hold the spoons, even how to walk properly, because some of them, they have the wrong gait. So it's a lot of work. We have like a whole team of people that work with the child just to make them do the simple things you see in everyday child that looks so simple. But it takes months and sometimes years to get a child like this to learn to hold the mouth properly. So these things are in place, but what we still say is that more than 70% of the families cannot afford them. That is still where the government comes in. There should be a place where the ordinary Nigerian could dress his or her child up and take that child for such services. So that is where the government still comes in.
And the parents at home too, once in a while, can always try to put their children to also learn some of these basic skills.
Yes.
You can't say, well, if Kemi is doing fine, you leave Ifeanyi down and nothing.
Yes.
As you tell Femi, pull up your shirt, you're also telling Mary or Philip or whatever his name is, also try to talk in as well. These are just basic skills that have to be developed day in, day out, I believe.
I tell you that any mother that has a child living with disability, even with occupational therapist, even with speech therapist, is doing like 70% more of the work than the therapist. The therapist is just there to kind of give a guide. Because when your child is not meeting up, in fact, you don't even have to wait for the child to meet up. You just get the guide.
There's something you touched on. I don't want us to miss it. You said that there is need for somewhere where parents can take their children to, not necessarily a school.
Yeah.
I want to get that right. Is it a school or a center?
Now the target is to shift from having a dedicated institution for them, because by inclusion they can learn the proper behavior. If you put all of them in a place where everybody in that environment is behaving that way, you see even the improved ones will begin to copy those behaviors.
So you're advocating incorporating it in the school system.
Yes, I'm advocating incorporating it in the school system. But these days, the challenge we have is that going to school sometimes seems like a waste of time. So you see a child of 13, and they are forcing him to learn to write 1, 2, 3. You realize that you are wasting that child's time. So you should find something that the child is very good at. Many of them love music. Many of them love knitting. Many of them just love doing one thing or the other.
Beyond formal education.
So yes, beyond formal education, there should be a provision to harness the talents of these children that, you know, you see that in so many cases you just realize the formal education is just wasting their time.
Sorry to cut you there, but we also have to have Femi included before we wrap up. Now, you also work with children who have cerebral palsy, and I know we actually had a special report that was done with somebody who has cerebral palsy and is now a lawyer. What would you also say to the fact that we have to still celebrate the little successes but push for more when it comes to
one thing that Ijeoma didn't happen here is they talk about autism being a spectrum. The truth is that everything is a spectrum. If you line up 10 children with the same kind of disability, whether it's autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, or whatever, they will present differently. Because, you know, either physically or mentally, everybody is affected differently. And that's why you have some children with cerebral palsy who grow up to become, you know, great talents. And, you know, like the lady you talk about who, she's not just a lawyer, she has a master's degree. You understand? And I have quite a few of them like that. Now with autism, what you have people who have excelled in academics, in mathematics and so on, even though they have autism. That's one side. There are those who have excelled in music. There are those who have excelled in drawing. From memory, they can draw anything, okay? They have that memory. But then you have some of them that can do nothing. or that they throw tantrums, okay, that, I mean, even the parents that can handle them. They're the ones you see at the airport, they just freak out and everybody is saying, Madam, control your child. And the woman is just, she's just so upset because you just don't know what she's going through and so on. So instead of saying, Madam, control your child, it's like, you know, you could say something better, okay? So when we have knowledge, we'll see that. Education makes all these things open. Getting the right institutions out there makes it open. Getting government and private sector to see how they can assist. You would say some of the schools are expensive because they're private, but then they are doing the right thing. So the thing is to find private sector individuals who will sponsor these children. If you go to homes for children, motherless babies and or whatever you call them, you'll be shocked to see the schools some of those children are going to, because people sponsor them and many of them have been found to be very brilliant. They're doing well. And we are beginning to discover that virtually every disability has the potential to produce brilliant individuals. So let's open up more room, more opportunities for these children.
Wow, well said. Thank you so much for the thoughts you brought to the table. We believe that those people with disability in Nigeria can have a better deal from the government of the day. So finally, I just want one word from you. What's your expectation from the incoming government? Just something for those people with disability.
It's going to get better.
Get better. And Ijeoma, what can you add to that?
Enlighten the populace.
Okay, more sensitization, you say. Thank you so much, Ijeoma Ugwu, convener, Awake Autism, for joining us on the show today. We've also had Femi Gbadebo, who is the founder of Benola Cerebral Palsy Initiative. Thank you so much. It's been great having you both on the show. Okay, this is still Nigeria Decides on Plus TV Africa. We'll take a quick break and the show returns in just a moment.